Okay. We're recording. And everybody, I'd like to welcome you to the 10th episode of Discussions with the Pros for the Enthusiastic Whiskey Hobbyist Facebook group. We started this after the lockdown started. And tonight I am really happy that we have with us one of my oldest friends in the whiskey industry, Brett Pontoni. So Brett, welcome. And if you could please tell me what you're drinking tonight and why.
Thank you. Well, currently I'm sitting in my office despite the scene behind me, and there are a few things laying around. So I'm revisiting a sample that I just got from our friends at Bacardi and Dewar's of one of the new exceptional casks that is going to be released this year to the United States in the fall, which is a 20-year-old. Can you see it?
Now we can see it.
A 20-year-old Aberfeldy from Sauternwood.
Wow.
That was just like a mouthful of fruit cocktail and honey and like honeycomb. It just is absolutely gorgeous. And we had the sample sitting around the office. We're done with it. Bacardi's not getting it back. So I figured that this
So
would
when
be
will that be in the stores?
Hoping October, November.
October, November. And something like that that's so rare. What do you think pricing for something like that'll be? Like 250, 300, something
They
like that?
were really reasonable. So let's see. They were last year, being at the computer, last year, their exceptional cask last year from Aberfeldy Distillery was a 19-year-old. It was ex-sherry button. It was $200.
Okay. So this being 26, and Sautern is probably going to be like 250 or so, right?
20, I bet you it's under 250.
Really? Okay. Well, tonight, let me tell you what I'm drinking. I opened up 2 bottles tonight for us. Both of them from Edredauer. Okay.
Nice.
One of them, your 2006, the Signatory 2006.
Was that the Bourbonwood?
Yes, Bourbonwood.
Yeah,
and I thought it'd be a nice comparison with Monique's here. Whoops. Sorry. Got it. We're saved. I thought it'd be a nice comparison with Monique's. Wasn't that a great way to start? Monique's Edredauer, 2009, when this one is the sherry butt. Okay?
Yes.
So there's a very big difference between the two. And you'll notice here, of course, for everybody, sherry, bourbon, both cask strength. Tell me a little bit about the selection process for the bourbon one.
I was actually kind of involved in both. So the selection process when we do Edredauer and all our signatory bottlings, which you guys have seen before, is probably the coolest and the most fun and the one that most people would like to participate with us, because we literally go to Edredauer Distillery, which is where all the casks for signatory vintage are stored. We sit down with Des and Andrew, the owner and the business manager and owner of the distillery, and Des gives us a list of every cask he has in stock. We go through, usually myself, Monique, because we've been traveling together on this trip for years, Pat and Joe from the Whiskey Hotline team, and we look at the list and we start naming all the things that we see that we would like to try. And then Des says, that's already sold, so you can't have it. Eventually, we bin the list and we walk up to the warehouse and we start walking through. And so we do every year, the distillery decides what Edredauers are ready to roll. So we always look at Edredauer and Belecken, which is what they call their peated distillate at first.
Right, Belecken. I have a bottle of Belecken too.
Yeah, and this year whatever the year, it's like, well, this year we're really happy. We've got some bourbon barrels that are really nice that are around 10 years old. We have some sherry that's around 10. We have some sherry that's around, and so on and so forth. And they go through their finishes. And over the years, we have done Sautern wood. We've done red wine wood. We have a couple of different French red wine, Italian red wine.
These are both delicious.
Bourbon.
These are delicious.
And it's amazing when you try them side by side, because theoretically it's the same juice off the still.
Right.
Polar opposites once they hit the wood, depending upon where their storage is pretty consistent. Where they keep the Edredauer casks is a pretty consistent climate and environment. You don't have variation like you do in Kentucky. So, even with their new warehousing, they because they don't have the severe climate swings and temperature swings
Mhm.
and they always have a lot of humidity, it's pretty stable in and out. But they use excellent wood.
Yeah.
We like, so there is this base sort of meaty, oily, almost a little bit dry, peppery, phenolic character to Edradour
Yeah.
that I love.
Well,
All
it's got a
that
great mouthfeel.
spice
It has a really good
and that
mouthfeel.
oil, yeah, that
Yeah.
is because then
Yeah.
they, and we know they have very small stills, and because they have very small stills, those very small stills aren't necessarily the most efficient, which means that a lot of weight and a lot of oil and a lot of phenolic compounds can pass through. So that will both add another layer of heft to something out of the bourbon, and it plays really well with the sherry.
So I want to tell you
And
something funny here about the different types of bottlings that I've had with you over the years, and something I just looked up. I don't know if you remember, you and I met based on a customer service issue with Binny's back in '97. Binny's, it was I think the first year that Lagavulin 16 made
right,
whiskey of the year. I went to a tasting of it with a buddy of mine, and we were tasting Lagavulin 16 for the first time. It was incredible. Then we went to buy it, and you guys were out of it. Okay. So I just had
right,
this tasting. It was incredible stuff. Never had it. We each wanted to buy a few bottles. So I sent an email to info@binnys.com. This is 1997. And then I got the email that changed your life and my life. I think my life for the better and your life for the worst. Um, the email was from Binstein. And actually, I was CC'd on it. And the email was from Binstein to you. And it just said in a very straightforward, simple fashion, Brett, take care of this guy. So here's how you took care of me, and this is customer service. So right after that, there was a special Macallan tasting, a high-end tasting, and they had 6 different expressions: 12, 15, 18, 18 Grand Reserve,
when
25,
that
and
was still
30.
available, yeah.
And back in '97, this was a $50 tasting. Okay, you sent me an email. You comped my friend and me into this, and then you said, "Let me know how many bottles of Lagavulin 16 you want, and we'll reserve some when they show up." So great. I decided to check something out today just for fun. The 18 Grand Reserve from 1997 for Macallan is now going for $5,000 a bottle.
Correct. And at that time, we actually had all of it we wanted, and
I
it
know.
was
It just,
$190.
right. It's killing
And
me. I mean,
people thought, and remember, the regular 18-year-old was maybe $80 to $100 in
right.
'97,
That was
and this
special.
was exorbitant at $180,
Right.
right?
Right. I bought one
And
bottle. I think I bought one
right.
bottle. I freaking loved it. And then I went on today, and it's a $5,000 bottle. It's just, it's incredible.
Well, and and that's actually truly the whole issue is supply and demand and actual genuine market created scarcity, because it was the Macallan Grand Reserve bottlings occurred over the course of a number of years. It was the end of Willie Phillips' tenure before Bob Delgarno, well, before Stuart Robertson, and then Bob Delgarno took over at the distillery. Was some of the last things that they did. And they released a lot. I mean, they released every year thousands and thousands
Mhm,
of bottles. All it was were very, very specifically picked sherry casks
mhm.
of Macallan. And think about all the other things that were out in that era that were similar, and some were more expensive, but that would be Ardbeg Provenance,
Mhm,
Ardbeg 17-year-old,
mhm.
Ardbeg 1977, both under $100 when we sold them.
Wow.
Provenance we closed out for $250. Black Bowmore was under 500. That's probably $10,000 to $15,000 now.
So,
Macallan 18, we had
so I have a
floor
specific
stacks
question
for
then
eight.
for you.
Yeah,
Specific question about this then. Does Binny's as a retailer, obviously managing inventory is a big issue, okay? Whenever you see something like that you have a hunch might grow in value dramatically, okay, beyond what the market might expect, do you keep any of that anywhere? Do you hold that aside, or do you try to go through your inventory?
we try to go through the inventory. Nobody really had a hunch on those, to be honest with you.
Okay,
Nobody, I mean, remember, Provenance was getting closed out.
right.
I mean, people kind of knew it started heating up in '03, '04, '05, right
Mm-hmm.
around that area was when the auction market started exploding, because all of these bottlings that were huge, literally tens of thousands of bottles, probably all told by the time they were done.
Hmm.
All of a sudden, people were buying them and drinking them up. And at some point in time, people realized it's like, okay, there was a lot of this around. Now there's not a lot of this around. This is dried up. And there were so many fewer things like that that were special that were getting released.
Got it.
So there were only a few things like that that were getting released, but there was a lot of them that got released.
Okay.
Now we're going to the opposite. Now there are dozens upon dozens upon dozens of releases of very, very small limited items that the manufacturer is taking all the auction value for right away. And Morrison B'More started it in 2004. Black B'More 1, 2, and 3, which were released in the late 90s, were all $400 to $500.
Hmm.
Anybody could get their hands on them. In Europe, they weren't really sold in the United States, they're sold in Europe. The fourth release was 2004, $4,000 retail, because that's what the spot auction rate was. The
Wow.
fifth release is more like 10 grand. If you have 1, 2, or 3, it's $10,000.
Yeah, that's
And do
crazy.
we catalog things? You know what? We might have some things cataloged, but we're not doing it to try to play speculation on the auction market. It's
Okay.
not really our style.
Okay.
If we happen to have anything pinned back, and you guys are all friends and you guys all attend a lot of our events and a lot of our tastings and keep up and are good customers, we would like to use some of these bottles possibly in the future to do some really cool tastings.
Got it.
And
So let
that's
me
really
actually,
what the use would
okay.
be.
So I want to tell everybody here also a little story about something you taught me about inventory and taking care of the walk-in customer. I think about 8 years ago, might have even been 10 years ago, there was a shortage of Oban 14. And Oban 14 was a bottle that I used to always have on my shelf. It's a nice bottle. Went to a bar one day with a client. We ordered Oban 14 and it was not available. I said, "What do you mean it's not available?" And the bartender said, "There's a big shortage." And I'm like, "Oh my God." So I went online that night, went to your website. It wasn't there. I sent you an email. I said, "Dude, Oban 14, is it gone? What's happening?" And
I
you
was still
said,
in Skokie at that time.
okay, what you said was very interesting. You said, "We have it in the stores. We're not putting it on the website because all the bars and restaurants would take it, but we want to keep it around for our walk-in customer." And I wanted to hug you through the computer because, that was just one of those things where it's like, okay, so that's how a retailer thinks and thinks about shelf space. And, so one question I have about, what's going on right now in the world, and we talked about it a little bit, is, your responsibility as a retailer to the consumer, okay, especially during times like this,
Yeah.
and especially being a business that was thankfully identified as being essential. And boy, are you guys essential. I've joked around that you guys are like Disney World right now. So, tell me a little bit about the decisions and discussions that you guys have had with respect to your responsibility in these times.
Well, we honestly, I don't know that it was a great deal of discussion. It was, one, our primary concern once we realized we were going to be able to stay open was how do we keep our staff as safe and as secure as possible? How do we avoid illness? How do we avoid clustered outbreaks? Because not only are our people potentially in danger, then we're endangering all of our customers and the whole thing breaks down. But we didn't really have a lot of discussion. It was easy. It's a really shitty thing is going on in the world right now, and why would you compound it by being shitty yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, why wouldn't we continue to operate? We didn't think that, initially we stopped all of our advertising, and we didn't stop
Why did you do that?
advertising we because it I don't think that trying to get people and run out and trying to take advantage and being competitive in that environment was the best thing to do. We didn't stop running the low prices. We just stopped running ads in the newspaper. We kept the
Interesting.
pricing. We kept, we spent more of our time developing a curbside pickup
Okay.
operation that would be effective, that would be efficient, because it keeps our people safe, it keeps you guys safe, if
Uh-huh.
that's an option. And that's counter to what Binny's is best at, because we're best when we can get people in our stores and we can talk to you. and we can sell you things.
Mm-hmm.
So we really don't, anybody with a modicum of operational talent could put together a curbside pickup and just dump boxes in people's trucks and
Right.
collect money. And we've done that very well, but that's not our core. Our core is the ability to talk to people and show off everything we have on the shelf. And so we had to be very careful for a while about doing that until we were comfortable that we could function in that way and keep our people safe, ergo keep our customers safe.
Got it.
So
And so far it's been working?
It has
it's
been.
been good with
We have,
COVID prevention?
we have had, we've had individual cases. We haven't had clustered outbreaks. We haven't been responsible for clustered outbreaks. And we're happy about that. I mean, not just for our folks, and we can take care, if something happened to our people, we can take care of our people. We have our benefits are very good. We know right up front that we have a responsibility to take care of our employees if they get sick, especially at work. It's on us to take care of them. And we have all the protocols in place to do that for the few folks who have had cases, right. But it's really avoiding the clustered outbreak. It's avoiding the advertising. It's not raising prices, which is more important. We didn't go out and aggressively try to seek business. We also didn't change pricing structures to take advantage of a captive audience either, because it's like the way we price allocated items. It's like the way we try to operate everything. We operate under the assumption that we have to be able to look at everybody 365 days a year. Well, 363 days a year, because we take Christmas and New Year's
right.
off. But we need to be able to look at people 365 days a year. And what good would it do for us to screw a bunch of people for a few months because we can? Then, this isn't going to last forever.
Yeah.
We've been around for
I'll get
71
to that later.
years.
Yeah. I'll get to that
We've
later.
been around for 71 years, and we plan on being around for forever if we can, and we continue to get the right people to run. So why would we take advantage? It just doesn't. I don't get.
Are you worried about alcoholism?
It's a very short-sighted business plan.
Right. What about, have there been any discussions about, and I know some people have been worried about alcoholism during this time. Has that been anything you guys have discussed with respect to your marketing and sales?
Outside of monitoring what the sales patterns were, we couldn't, that's part of the reason to not.
So you do that, you do monitor those types of things.
Yeah, not advertising. And we watch what our mix was, and there is a great social concern. There was a huge social concern about a lot of things, about, part of the reason why, there are a couple of reasons why liquor stores were considered essential, like grocery stores and drugstores. And one of the arguments was supposedly because it is easier if there's an issue with people drinking, it's easier to just keep that availability there rather than have people basically go into alcohol withdrawal and end up in hospitals that are already overcrowded.
And make
that's
things
probably
worse
a
already.
very probably a very dark way to view it.
No, but it's realistic. It's realistic.
The other way to look at it, honestly, is because in a lot of our poor, less affluent neighborhoods, especially in the west side and the south side in the city of Chicago, have food deserts. Right. And in a lot of cases in a food desert, the liquor store, even though it's crappy snack food, the liquor stores or a bodega or things like that in a food desert, that's where a lot of people get food. And you can't take away that proximity if the whole purpose of closing everything down is to get people to stay at home or stay as close to home as possible.
Okay.
Right. So that was another argument for the essential business. Okay.
One other operational question I have for you before we open it up to the group is this. Historically, it's been almost impossible to get in touch with you. You're always traveling. Okay. You and I know, the number of times you and I have emailed each other over the years, and I've texted you. I didn't know if you were alive or not, and you were in like Tasmania or something. It's just, you were traveling all the freaking time. So obviously your life has changed that way. With respect to selecting whiskeys for Binny's, how has this affected you? So obviously people are sending things to you, but you can't really go to the distilleries as frequently as you could before. So how has that been affecting you and what you see coming down the pipeline?
It hasn't been too bad yet.
Okay.
Well, depends on your perspective. It did cost our annual trip to Scotland. So we did have to have signatory mail samples to our importer, and our importer had to send them along for Pat and Joe and I and Monique to try for
Right.
what's going to go to Binny's and what's going to go to Winebow, which is our Illinois wholesaler,
Mm-hmm.
and Midwest wholesaler.
Mm-hmm.
So that we had to do. That was disappointing. I had Cubs Cardinals tickets in London, which is not
Oh,
work related, but I'm still bitter about that because I had both games in London.
oh, that
And I
sucks.
probably would have gotten some work done since I was in the UK. But
Right.
we had scrambled to get a lot of stuff done in late January through early March anyway, just to try to compress the travel a little bit to alleviate exactly what you just said, which was then all of a sudden, so rather than playing Where's Waldo all summer, to maybe actually get a lot of stuff done. So there isn't the need to go down as much. So we actually got a lot. The timing was good because our last trip concluded on March 12th. And, in Chicago, at least, everything, the world was pretty much turned upside down starting that Saturday, March 15th was when everybody exhibited their lack of control and ability to behave, which meant that the
Right.
state got shut down
Right.
shortly after that. Um, so we got a lot of that out of the way. We have actually done one trip since then. About a week and
Really?
a half ago, we did make a trip where we assessed. We had to go to Four Roses. There are a couple of distilleries that we really can't do. It's just for a lot of reasons not very easy for us to do picks in the office with samples. We really need to go down there. So we
Okay.
just did our picks at Four Roses, and we're going to be doing some Buffalo Trace stuff with them. And that is, again, and they have protocols in place that are extremely safe that they had to be very transparent with to us. And it was a very limited team. And we literally drove down, checked into a hotel, didn't talk to anybody, got in the car, went to the distillery. Everything was pre-poured in individual stations,
Wow.
temperature checks, masks, did our tasting, elbow bumped, goodbye.
Goodbye. Yeah.
Hopefully, the hugs come next year. And
Right.
then literally drove straight home.
There are going to be a lot of hugs next year. There are going to be a
They're
lot of
going to be,
hugs
yeah,
next
you
year.
know what? And this is, I mean, you can tell there's a vowel at the end of the name. So there is a certain amount
Yeah.
of the Italian blood that just is confused right
Yeah.
now with why you
I got to
can't
tell
touch
you, man.
people.
I've mentioned that I'm gonna ugly cry when I get to go back to Delilah's. I mean, it's just, I miss the place. And
Yeah.
now, by the way, speaking of Delilah's, so we had Paul Letko on here a little while ago from Few, of course, and
Right.
I was talking to Paul about the Four Roses, about the Four Kings, and one thing that I learned about that is how that all got started was after Whiskey Fest one year, and he told us specifically that Bill Welter and Paul and people from Corsair and Mississippi were there, and you were there, and they started joking around about getting together to do something. And I learned something about your role in this industry because Paul told us that they were all joking around and they were all sort of drunk. And you said, if you guys get together and do this, I will buy every single bottle, which
That
is
is
what you
true.
said. That's a true
I
story?
told It is. They came in. I knew it was bouncing around at Whiskey Fest that year. And then, you know how everybody sort of is licking their wounds the day after Whiskey Fest and
Yeah.
trying to pick up the pieces. And yeah, Paul, we joked around about it. And Ryan Burkett from Mississippi River Distilling,
Mm-hmm.
who's ultimately was the person who's always, since we've been doing it, which is 7 years now,
Yeah, I think so.
has always the one that's collected all the barrels from all the distillers, stored them, decided once they decide what they're going to do, he's the one that does all the dumping, marrying, finishing, storing, bottling, label compliance, shipping.
So these are
So
also,
yeah,
but they're all sold by you, or do they now go to other people as
no,
well?
now they go, well, we got in trouble. Right, we got in trouble for that right out of the gates because Ryan and Paul came over, and I said, no, I'm dead serious, guys. I said, if you guys do this, I said, well, I'll make it easy. No matter what. I mean, how much can it be, right? What can it be? 50, 60 cases when you're done?
Yeah.
Everybody contribute a barrel, put it together. It turns out I'll buy the whole bottling run, and we'll call it a day. And if it takes about a year to do it, we'll launch it next year at the Binny's World of Whiskey. And they're
Beautiful.
like, done. And so then they talked amongst themselves, and that's when Ryan kind of got assigned because he did all the compliance, got all the label approval, got all the wholesalers. Because again, you had 4 different craft distillers that had 4 different wholesalers.
Right.
So because of exclusive contracts in Illinois at the wholesale level, luckily everybody played, and they didn't quite understand. One of the things Ryan had to do was one wholesaler had to clear it to make it practical. But then when then I paid them, they paid the bills. Then they paid the bills back to Ryan, then Ryan had to split the money back to the other wholesalers and to the other. I mean, it was very complicated. It's become much more streamlined now. But yeah, that was it. And then lo and behold, immediately we found out that it is illegal to have an exclusive in the state of Illinois for a retailer.
Oh shit! Is that a Wirtz
And
thing? Is that a Wirtz thing? Maybe.
no, because Wirtz was the one that had to defend it the first time.
Okay,
It
I knew
is
there was
no,
Wirtz was involved in this somehow.
it is they had it is you're not allowed a retail exclusive now.
Okay.
And people ask, well, how? It just what they've done is to prevent. It's part of an old Tide House rule that that you can't restrict that a supplier can't refuse to sell to somebody who has a valid retail, either on premise or on premise, a valid retail license in Illinois. Now, we don't Binny's handpicked casks get to only go to Binny's because other people could pick their own handpicked cask.
Got it.
So the single cask we pick is perfectly legal, and other retailers do the
Right,
same
of course.
thing. They pick
Warehouse
single
does it
casks,
too. Warehouse does it
and
all the time.
we wouldn't have any rights towards their single casks as long as everybody had the opportunity to do a single cask throughout the program. Theoretically, if we wanted to be jerks, we could probably buy Kirkland products. I mean, we wouldn't want to because why would we want to sell, Costco's private label? But theoretically, by the spirit and the letter of the law, we could buy that. So you don't really do it. So, and you know what? And it wasn't even illegal in the first place because the first 4 Kings and all subsequent 4 Kings were actually sold to Clark Street Ale House, Fountainhead, Delilah's, and one other bar that's escaping me right now. But there were 4. Twisted Spoke might have gotten some. There were at least 4 bars, so technically it wasn't exclusive.
I got to
because
tell you,
other license
it's
holders were able
delicious
to
stuff,
purchase.
and I love it. And I'm just glad that you
This
actually were
year's
there.
This year's was killer.
Yeah, but I'm
This
really glad
year's
it's.
was really cool.
I mean, these are the kind of things we've been learning in these whiskey interviews over the last, few months that we've been doing. But I don't want to monopolize this, so I'm going to be quiet right now. I'm going to let Eric now moderate the questions. I want to remind everybody, Eric cannot unmute you. You can only unmute yourself. Eric, if you have any questions, you should ask your question first, and then let people ask their other questions. So I'm going to be quiet now, and then I'll come back in later.
Actually, so one question I have is, how have you seen the different types of products that you've sold? How they differed now during coronavirus than before?
Early on there was I think early on there was a little bit of hoarding behavior, just like a lot of things around. So like in the wine world, you would see like larger format packages, people buying a little bit more box wine. People didn't know what money was, so maybe they were buying down a level in terms, if you're talking about pricing tiers, maybe buying down a level a little bit, buying bulk. Then it got interesting because once the on-premise not being people didn't have the ability to go to bars and restaurants for a number of weeks before that all opened up and you could do a little carry out. Then the mix got interesting because then what had been growth categories on premise started being growth categories for us. This has been and we're trending just like the rest of the country. This has been a really good, a really good summer for agave, especially mezcal. It's turned into a really good summer for gin. It's turned into, whiskey continues to plug along. And when we were worried that everything, because of curbside and because of in-store pickup and because of us not being able to really talk to customers very easily and talk about new items and talk about product, that it would sort of devolve to more commodity nationally known brands. That's not happened. It's been pretty good. Folks have been coming into the stores. Folks have been going onto the website and still buying interesting things. And that was when we finally decided we were going to start marketing again, rather than market price and rather trying to market for volume. We went right back to trying to market for interesting products. Like, hey, you know what? We all have to stay at home, but new stuff is still happening. And so that's sort of where we've shifted, is still continuing to run the barrel program, to talk about all the new things that are coming in. But those are the most interesting. A couple of categories have really grown that were on-premise darlings that all of a sudden have exploded. For us, prominently, agave and gin, probably.
Great. All right, next question.
Michael Nolan and then Michael Bloom.
Brett, how you doing?
Hey.
You kind of touched on part of this earlier in the conversation. I've known you about probably 15 years. And I know that every May you go to Scotland and you've come back with some phenomenal barrel picks. And I've also noticed in the last few years, I don't know, 10 years ago, you'd come back, you'd have 15 or 20 different barrels. The last couple of years, it seems like maybe it's a change of market, but you've had much fewer Scotch barrels, more bourbon coming in, bourbon barrel picks coming in. Is that the way the market's going? And then part two of this is, since you didn't go in May, were you able to pick Scotches for this fall?
Yes. So second question first. Yes, we were able to pick. We actually have 4 new casks coming tomorrow. From Signatory. We have a re-up on our Stoisha, which was the Young Bunnahabhain. This year it's a 5-year-old. Last year we did it as a 4. So we have the Stoisha coming. We have there you go, the 5-year-old version of that. It is awesome. Same family of casks, just 1 year older. We have a 12-year-old Daluin coming. We have a 13-year-old Glenlossie coming, and a 10-year-old Linkwood coming. And then we have also picked for the fall, and these are things that we had been looking at last fall, and we're kind of, well, maybe we'll go back in May and we'll retry them. And then when we realized we weren't going back, we said, no, let's just do them now for summer arrival. Then we're also doing 3 more casks for the fall, a Craigellachie, a Kalila, I've got to find my notes for the last one, and a Mortlock, another one of those like 11-year-old Mortlock that was coming out of Bourbonwood, like we've done the last few of them. So exactly, a sister cast to that. So in terms of slowing down, I mean, yes, the part of that is a reflection of sort of where whiskey taste, whiskey consumer behavior is going, and that has been an explosion in New World and American whiskey. And I wouldn't say like a slowdown in Scotch, but Scotch has flattened out a little bit. So and it's become more price driven because bourbon tends to be less expensive, right? So that's part of it, part of where we have gone with that. We're still flipping in older casks of Scotch as they become available. You know, the other issue we had was when Scotch whiskey started blowing up all over the world, which has happened in the last 3 or 4 years, that honestly has also had an effect on what we've been able to do, because it's caused us a couple of problems. One, it did cause a shortage. It did cause a shortage in what was available for us to get, i.e. Signatory, Gordon and MacPhail, Cadden Heads even, and some of the places where we had typically been buying the merchant bottlers. No distilleries were doing original bottlings of hand picks. The independent bottlers were struggling getting things for us to pick, which was part of the slowdown. And prices also skyrocketed. And so that was another factor that went in. Something that we had done, we did if we had done a 10-year-old Mortlock, Kalila is the best example. We used to always be able to do 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old Kalila and we could sell for 50, 60, $60, right? Great deals. All of a sudden now they were at a point, that I think was $69.99, right? So 2 years ago, we walked to Signatory and we asked to see a 9-year-old Kalila or an 8-year-old Kalila. And Des said, I'll let you try it. It's a Kraken cask. He goes, but you won't buy it. And we said, why? And then we found out we would have had to sell, literally, we would have had to sell it for $120. He said, in fact, we might not actually ever bottle any of this off as Kalila. We might just use this, hold it, trade it for something else that will have more value down the road, and wait till the price for Kalila gets more reasonable. So there are a lot of those moving parts that went on that caused what you have noticed as a little bit of a pullback in terms of the amount of barrels that we're doing. Now, our issue was, just as we're ready to roll forward, we have tariffs, which has also blown up the pricing structure again on that, because these aren't, our supplier can't afford to eat that extra 25% price increase. I mean, we're kind of, if we want to do it now or after October 18th of last year, we're stuck with the 25% price increase, and that's impacted as well what's happening in real time.
Got it. All right. Now, Michael.
The great 19 and 20-year-old Lafroigs that you were selling, for $100, which were just incredible. I should have bought cases of it.
Yeah, exactly. Because you know what? They won't even sell. There are, every once in a while, we see a little wee cask of Lafroig sticking around in the back of the warehouse. But if we walk down that row, we usually get a very stout Scottish. Don't even walk down there. So
that's great. All right, Michael Bloom.
So I had several questions, but I'm going to ask one that goes the opposite direction, American whiskey, than Mike Nolan's. At the top of the call, you mentioned that Edward has small, inefficient stills, which leads to the redolent mouthfeel, the really heavy mouthfeel. I found that it's hard to find a really great mouthfeel in American whiskey. You can sometimes, but I wanted to ask you, are there American distillers with small stills that I should keep an eye out for that might actually have more mouthfeel because of that? And if that's not the only factor that lends to that, what American whiskeys do you know that actually do a phenomenal job with mouthfeel?
So part of that is one, I think there's going to be a difference just based in the distillate and complexity of, what you're distilling. So, part of that might just be you're not going to get the same sort of mouthfeel and character from corn whiskey and rye whiskey that you get from malt whiskey. The short answer in terms of stills, a number of craft distillers, Fuse stills, for instance, just here locally, Fuse stills are relatively small. The Whiskey Acres still is relatively small, even though it's a column. So anybody that's doing craft bourbon and rye out of pots are gonna have that. Interestingly enough, I saw somebody just made a comment. Yeah, Oppidan is one that's, Oppidan stills are relatively small, and he's doing some really interesting things where he's trying to manipulate character by distillation. That's the other piece. It's not just the size of the still you're distilling on, but how you're distilling, how you're making cuts, what you're bringing across, the materials you're using. In the bourbon world, big still world, Wilderness Trail has done some really cool, interesting things. New Riff has played around a lot with some new and interesting things. You're about to see Whiskey Acres release their first bottled and bond, which will eventually get to be their regular everyday release, will be bottled and bond. That's going to have some more character, some more weight. But I think that it's a couple of things. I think that if you're talking about the kind of mouthfeel that Edredauer has, I don't think, to be honest with you, everybody necessarily wants to do that, right? Because they go pretty deep into the tails and have some pretty oily, hefty spirit. I think Pontoni does that a little bit. I don't think it's because they go real deep. Pontoni to me always seems to have that character. Something like Glenfarclas. I look at the distilleries in Scotland, they use worm tubs. That contributes to it as well, because worm tubs are not a particularly efficient way to condense, which means that you get less, you have less copper contact by nature with a worm tub, because you're passing them through less copper, and they're coming into less contact because they're getting deep into the worm's tub, or they're condensing at the top and just flowing through as liquid. So Dalwhinnie has worm tubs. There are a bunch of different places. Talisker has worm tubs still. Craigellachie has worm tubs still. So,
by the way, it's Paul's birthday today, so everybody wish Paul a happy birthday. He's the
Paul Barrett. Paul.
Cheers.
Paul, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Hey, Paul, somebody else is wishing you.
And Paul, happy birthday to the beard too. That's one hell of a beard.
Exactly. How old is that beard?
Paul, unmute yourself.
As old as I am at this point.
Right?
I mean, it was there and trimmed before the Rona, and now it's just getting ridiculous.
Well, Paul, since you have the dais right now, Paul. So, Paul, we're going to give you the dais. Since it's your birthday, and obviously you're knowledgeable in this as well, and you have a great inventory. Do you have a question for Brett?
I actually had a number and so many now that it's just ridiculous.
Okay. We can go on for hours, and we are going to have a hard stop at 8:00. We might have an after party if anybody wants to stay around, but we are going to have a hard stop at the interview at 8. So you want to ask him a pointed question?
Yeah, I'll do a couple quick ones. First of all, a throwaway. How freaking great is this Stoisha?
Just wait until you have the 5. Only because it is, and I know your style, what you like, and yes, the 5 you're going to be just fine, because it is exactly that, maybe just a touch less spirity. And again, it hasn't lost that youthful power, and there's still some spirity character, because again, it's still only 5 years old, but it's just rounded out a little bit more. Those casks are stunning.
You're going to keep buying those for years to come, right? We're going to see the 8-year and then the 12-year eventually.
Well, here, the only factor there that we can is if they sell through them. And that's the problem. Now, that being said, when we were there in October of last year, he probably still had 15 or 20 of them laying around, which was very similar to like the Mortlocks we've been doing, and the Linkwoods we've been doing, and the Craigellachie. Those were all sort of sorry, I saw that too.
Thanks, Kenny. Thank you, Kenny.
Why did you use the word star in that comment, though?
Right, exactly.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate that one too.
We'll continue. We'll continue to do those, like everything else we're doing when we're picking the signatory barrels. We'll continue to do those as long as we can continue to do those, as long as they have the stocks, or until we discover something else that's young and ripping. I mean, look, if I had to choose between the two, and all of a sudden a 5-year-old Kalila pops up that's in bourbon wood that we can get our hands on, that we don't have to sell for $500 a bottle, we would do it, right, and continue with that.
I miss those Kalilas. I'm down from about 8 bottles of various releases to about 6, and they're looking pretty low right now.
Well, we had a Kalila that was right on the edge for us to pick this year that is either a 9 or a 10, and I'm hoping the Monique does it for Winebow.
Yeah,
So
Monique,
you'll
her
have it.
Boutique had a really good, I think it was a
Yeah.
sherry-aged Kalila, wasn't it? I think that she had a few years ago. That was
Yep.
good. That was
They
really
did.
good.
They had their Port Charlottes out of theirs were good.
Uh-huh.
The Isla number one is actually Ardbeg, and that was a 12-year-old plus a
That was hard to
25-year-old.
guess.
Right.
Yeah.
So I actually do want to ask you another question here before somebody else does, because
Mhm.
Dave Sweet wanted me to point this out to you. Okay. So I really, Dave's a great guy, and I called him out on something a few weeks ago, and I told him, I said, look, Dave, when I go to Binny's and I try to buy things, one thing that I like to see is the color of the juice that it's in the bottle. And, these bottles, I mean, they're beautiful. These bottles are freaking beautiful, but you have no freaking idea what's in them. And he told me that I had to bring this up to you because you called him out on it too.
He wants to see veins pop out in my head. So apparently Dave has, and I told him the same thing. Dave, they're gorgeous. There was a craft distiller in Indianapolis that was doing the same thing, and I'm spacing right now. And I'm like, boy, that's great. And these are like $10 bottles. I said, buy a freaking glass bottle for $2 and knock your price down by 8.
Right.
Right. And I love it. And the bottles are gorgeous, and the concept and the whiskey is wonderful in there. But you're right. You can't sell brown goods in opaque bottles.
Right.
It just doesn't work.
Right.
People want to see what they're buying.
Right. You see, this one in particular. So this is the Town
Is that
Branch.
a Town Branch? That's
Town Branch,
Yeah.
aged in the Oloroso for 10 years and 4 months. And what cracks me up here is that how many
Kentucky?
I know.
Kentucky.
How many American whiskeys have been aged for over 10 years, okay? And he puts it in a freaking opaque bottle.
Right.
I'm sorry, I just don't get it. So he told me that I had to bring this up to you because you would crack up.
because he knew that he would see veins pop out in my head.
Right. And it's delicious stuff. I mean, it's an amazing sherry bomb.
Yeah, we're looking at a couple of those. Town Branch still has a couple of those. I'm trying to catch one before it goes over the top because, again, 10 years in Lexington, Kentucky might be 20 years in Scotland.
Got it.
Right? Because of the heat, because of the nature of the beast, it just has the potential to be really woody. They're still drinking okay. They've got some fresh bourbon that they filled and some virgin oak that they filled. The fresh bourbons are nice as well.
But look at this color. Look at this color. This color is just freaking amazing. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
All right. So other questions. Okay.
Who's up?
All right. I'm going to ask something. Okay. So I'm going to tell you about a few things that we've learned about you from the other people who have been on the interviews. Okay. So Lou Bryson. Okay. Lou Bryson, great guy. He one of the best stories he told us about you was something about you jumping over him at a pool bare ass naked.
I was going to say, did he tell the Bardstown Parkview Inn story?
Yeah.
So there was a time when we went to Bourbon Fest. That did happen. There was a time when we used to go to Bourbon Fest every year, and I would go down with Binny's staff to do some education. We'd spend 2.5 intensive days just blasting through distilleries, trying to get everybody to see as much as we possibly could. Then on the weekend, staff would go back because the stores were busy. I would stay down there with the trade. Some customers would come down and join up, and it would be a chance to catch up with people like John and Amy were always there at the time Malt Advocate. Lou was always there because he was the managing editor of Malt Advocate for John. And yes, we had done a lot of bourbon sampling. A lot of quality control was going on by the pool. And at some point in time, the quality control reached the point in time where I felt like I needed to be free. And Lou was sitting him on the side of the pool, sticking his hand in the water, waving it back and forth, and a completely unclothed Brett dove right over the top of his head.
That's awesome.
Amy Hansel, Amy was there too. John and Amy from Malt Advocate. And Amy looked up and said, "Is Brett naked?" And I believe that's the point in time where John said, "Yeah, we're going to go back to the
Very, very nice. And from Monique, we learned something. From Monique, we learned that you are a sentimental softie and that you cry whenever things get emotional, and that
Well,
she
yes.
talked about her wedding, and she talked about getting her being awarded Keeper of the Quake, and
Yes.
and the emotional moment that was.
Yes. Well, because we managed to surprise her. It was actually Andrew Symington, who we've talked about, the owner of Signatory and Edward Hour. Andrew was the one who nominated and pushed through the nomination for me to become a keeper of the Quake a few years ago. And the next year, we were traveling, and Monique had taken over for a couple of years, had taken over the import for Signatory, taken over the Midwest wholesale for Signatory, and worked with the importer. And he said, do you think, Monique's now in the business for this amount of time, do you think she should be a keeper? And I'm like, yeah, of course. He goes, do you think we could do it as a surprise? I'm like, how the hell am I going to get her? I mean, first of all, what a jerk, right? It's just like, hey, would you like to go to I mean, I know you're not a keeper, but you should come to the Keeper of the Quake banquet, right? I mean, how am I going to pull this off? But we got her over there, and yes, she burst into tears. I burst into tears. Andrew burst into tears because we got her upstairs. We managed to get everybody, and I was getting all of her emails and her information because they tell you this is what you have to wear. This is how you have to prep. This is all coming to me. All the other people, David, who you guys know, David from Glenmorangie,
Right.
Blackmore. Blackmore was being made a keeper at that event. A couple of people we know. So we had to get a hold of Blackmore and say, by the way, if you see Monique, don't say congratulations. Just say, oh, hey, you're here. Great. George
Wow.
Grant, keep your mouth shut.
The
Don't
whole
say a word.
conspiracy here.
Ian McCallum, everybody. We had to tell all the suppliers that know her to keep their mouth shut until we got her piped into the castle, got her upstairs at the entrance, and she's like, what do we get? We're getting my invitation. She sees her name on a card. It's like, oh, I guess this is my table assignment. And Andrew grabs it and hands it to her and says, you're going to be made keeper of the Quake. And then
all of a sudden the tears just start flowing.
Yeah.
Well, I got to tell you, man, she described this to us, and I got to tell you, man, she got emotional telling us about it, and you're getting emotional about this too. I mean, it sounds like an unbelievable accomplishment. So, kudos to you. One other thing I want to ask you about, and a little bit of kudos to you also. For everybody on here, if you have not yet logged on to see the Binny's Whiskey Wednesdays, okay, your interviews on Wednesdays, I got to tell you something. They're pretty amazing, and I get on whenever I can. I try to. Can you tell us a little bit about the Whiskey Wednesdays, and also a little bit about the Fawn Weaver interview, because that was incredible.
Well, that was incredible. So when everything shut down, there were my very cynical view of marketing in general, even though I have an academic background in it. It is, everybody in the world, you had a whole bunch of people that had a whole lot of time on their hands. And we talked about that. We stopped our advertising because we didn't know whether or not that would be appropriate given the times. We just wanted to keep our heads down, keep the stores running, keep everybody moving along. Then we started getting people that said, hey, well, listen, if you want to run this, we have this video of our brand ambassador talking. We would like you to embed that on your website. And it's like, yeah, our website is not a vehicle for you to plant commercials on.
Right.
So we're not going to do that. And then Zoom, we started Zooming with friends, and we started talking. And Monique was actually one of the drivers because she was doing it right from the beginning with her sales staff and then with her suppliers. We were like, well,
right.
You know what?
I think the first one I saw, right.
Yeah.
The first one I saw was when you guys were rolling out this stuff, which is one of the reasons why today I went to your store, because I knew I had your Edward Hour, and I wanted to have the Edward Hour that you and she discussed about a month ago.
And it was one of the first ones we did. She was doing them. We started, I thought, okay, you know what? These people are coming here and offering all this stuff. So why don't we get control over it? Let's control where we're going to make sure that we accomplish what we want to accomplish, which isn't just, again, embedding a commercial on the website. We want to see if we can get some value out of these things. And so instead of having virtual tastings, we kind of turned them into more interview sorts of things.
And is it every Wednesday? Every Wednesday at 5 o'clock?
It has been pretty consistently every Wednesday at 5 o'clock. Like tomorrow, we're talking to Richard Patterson. Tomorrow we've got Richard Patterson from the Dalmore and Jura is going to
Beautiful.
be on talking about. It won't have quite the effect when he sets off a party popper, but nonetheless, we
Okay.
get one
Well,
of
I
the
want to make
legends
sure
of the
people
business.
know that those
And
things have been great. They've been a lot of fun. I've enjoyed them.
the interview
But
with Fawn could
Fawn
not have
Weaver.
been more timely. And this is the advantage and why we wanted to do one. We're trying to, with all due respect to brand ambassadors, we're trying to stick to owners and distillers.
Good.
We had already had Fawn scheduled when all of the protests around the death of George Floyd started popping up. And it just so happened that shortly after that, we had a Black female distillery owner who started her project to shed light on the fact that Jack Daniel's first master distiller was actually a freed slave in the 1850s in central Kentucky, Nearest Green in central Tennessee, Nearest Green, nickname Uncle Nearest. And we had met Fawn and have always had a good relationship with Fawn from the beginning of the business. So it was kind of easy to get a couple of questions to her that she normally doesn't get, because it's not what the PR team thinks. They're not bad things to talk about. It's not what the PR team thinks, because it gets her off a point out there just plugging
Right.
whiskey. But what it does is it tells you the deep connections that some of these distilleries have where they're from, the deep connections distilleries have in culture, the underlying connection the human beings have that exists despite what we see as this cover of racism in some cases. The fact is, underlying the ability to not have that exists. And that to me was one of the great things that Fawn was able to shed light on, was the fact that she was accepted and there was no reason for anybody in the town of Lynchburg to be nice, but instead Jack Daniel's relatives and Lem Motlow's relatives and Nearest Green's relatives came and said, "Are you the woman from New York?" She told the story. "Are you
Right.
the woman from New York?" "I'm Jack Daniel's great cousin."
God, I love this.
And
this interview is available, and this interview is available on the Binny's website. Am I right about that?
On our website, and should be on our Facebook Live
Okay.
feed too.
I've got to tell
should be able to
everybody
get that
here.
Facebook Live.
Okay, I've got to tell you something. Everybody here, y'all know whiskey. Y'all love whiskey. Y'all love the business of whiskey. The times that we're in now are very, very interesting. And this particular interview, Brett really just nailed it. This interview was the right person at the right time. Okay, it was incredible just to hear her speak. It was inspirational. And I do, since we are talking about her, we got about 2 minutes here. The whiskey, good. I haven't had Uncle Nearest yet. You happy with it?
Yes, very, very happy. Their single barrels in particular, they have, and again, she didn't do this as a celebrity brand, or she didn't do this as a way to monetize a fantastic story. I mean, when she decided she was going to start a brand to honor Nearest Green, she got a woman who had worked at Jack Daniel's for years in quality control. She sourced the people whom she sourced her whiskey from. She took creative control over what was being produced and has had creative
this is legit
control
stuff.
with
This
her.
is legit.
It is. The distillery where they're getting their product is great. What they have had thus far coming off their own stills, this is legitimately a classic, excellent Tennessee whiskey.
That's
Absolutely.
wonderful. We're almost at 8 o'clock here. Does anybody else have any other quick questions? Yeah, Sid Paul.
Hey, Brett. I have a
Hey,
quick
Sid.
you. What's your favorite Binny's handpick so far?
Oh, Jesus.
Maybe it's a favorite child's question, but
It is. Yeah, I mean, it is a little bit of a favorite child, but when I go back, and it's a moving target, as all you guys know, it's a moving target, right? Because Sid, we see what you post and you talk. You have in the last 6 months have had 10 different favorite whiskeys, right? Depending upon what kind of mood you're in, what you do. And it's 100%. That's the wonderful thing about whiskey, and
Right.
why we keep going out there and looking for things and trying things, because it moves. The one I'll name, and I have a picture somewhere buried on my phone that I can put as a background, that actually Monique and I bought the last bottle of, we had sitting in the in the cellar. It was a 14-year-old Kalila from Bourbon Hogshead from 2004, which is actually one of the earliest barrels that I picked with Signatory.
Wow.
When we didn't pick an Edredauer, when we picked with whatever he had laying around in his very cramped bottling facility in Edinburgh. That was it. And Monique was on a different trip. She remembered the bottling. It was the old blue label that we used to be on Signatory Vintage, like pre-labeled. That is what is on the top of my mind, is probably my favorite. And then not only was the whiskey absolutely a stunning Kalila, there are a lot of very good personal memories, how it was picked, different people I've shared bottles with. And we just opened it on 4th of July weekend, and actually sent pictures of a picture of her and I to Andrew and Des at the distillery on 4th of July weekend.
Good.
And sort
That's
of said,
awesome.
you know,
Well,
and then wanted to take a dig, and sorry we won.
Right.
But yeah, that's a great question. That is one of my top favorites. And we did an Edredauer. There was an Edredauer Sauterne cask we did probably 10 years ago that I've got a little bit laying around of, that I'm going to be very sad to see go.
Well, even the new door that you guys did is spectacular.
Yeah. Well, if you like sherry bombs, it was.
You can see the color of the whiskey in my glass.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. This is the town branch. Look at the town branch. I mean, look at the sherry in the town branch. You know?
And you know, those things are harder to do than you think, because those things are harder to do than you would think, because it's not just, we can find things that have obviously had heavy sherry exposure for whatever reason. They've taken on a lot of sherry character, even in the case of that Edredauer after only 10 years rather than a lot of years. But finding one that doesn't taste like a woody, tarry mess,
Right,
is where it gets tough.
okay.
It's not just the color and the appeal. It's actually getting one that I want to put a Binny's name on, or at the very least put on our shelves.
Okay. All right. So on that note, by the way, we are now at a little bit after 8 o'clock here. So what I want to do is this. I want everybody, if everybody can unmute, okay, like everybody to unmute right now. I like everybody to take a glass. This is probably my fourth cask strength tonight. And in addition to my fourth cask strength, there were 2 non-cask strengths. So it's been a great night. Brad, I got to tell you something. It's been wonderful to be your friend for over 20 years. It's been wonderful to host all these tastings with you. I can't imagine the luck that we had in having the Anche Emmett tasting this year right before the lockdown. How goddamn lucky we got with that. Appreciate all that you guys are doing at Binny's. We appreciate these Whiskey Wednesdays, the events. And I just want everybody to say thank you, Brett, and l'chaim, and cheers.
Thank you, Brett.
And cheers.
And guys, just so you know, we will be together next year by March or April.
Yeah.
I'm firmly convinced we will be together again. It might not be in February, but we'll be together next year, March or April.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, Eric, if you can do me a favor, what we're going to do now is we're going to stop the recording. If anybody wants to stay around for a little bit, just for a little bit of an after party, that's fine. But, Brett, you are totally free to go. And, again, thank you very much, buddy. We appreciate it. But let's stop the recording and go to an after party if anybody wants to do so. Thanks, everybody. Feel free to go if you want to.